Okay, so we're coming in slowly again.
Okay, we're here.
So then we're letting two. Let's see. I think Malik still needs to.
Malik, you gotta click the camera thing again to come back in. Hey.
All right. So are we good to start?
Sure.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Sure. All right. Well, thank you for making this panel, this Megascope piece about diversity in comics. Also talking about the new Megascope line that I am the curator and creator of is a new imprint with Abrams Comic Arts. My name is John Jennings, and I'll be your host today. We have some wonderful panelists that are invited to come and have a conversation about their book, Death's Day, and also my assistant editor is here too. And we're going to talk about, I'll let people introduce themselves, or I'll go through and like maybe have people tell us a little bit about yourself. So we're going to start from top to bottom. Mr. Chuck Collins.
Oh, I'm at the top. Okay.
Yeah. My screen be at the top.
What's going on, y'all? My name is Chuck Collins. I am an illustrator, art director, and comic book creator. I am the artist on Death's Day, and I have a webcomic called Bounce, which is a comedic take on my time as a bouncer in New York City for about 12 years. I've worked in animation, also done a couple other comics on my own. And that's pretty much it.
Very dope. Lovely to have you. I'm so glad you're on the book too, by the way.
Oh, thank you, man. Pleasure to be on the book. Honored.
No, thank you. Seriously. Next up, we have the great Daniel Jose Older, who is part of the writing duo for Death's Day.
John, I feel like when you say your name, though, you got to be like the legend, John Jennings.
No.
Yes. Like, I know people know, but like, you know, you're a big deal. Like,
I appreciate it. But no, I like the adjectives like Marvel Comics used to have, like jovial John Jennings, or like, you know, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yes,
smiling Stan Lee, you know, that kind of thing.
All right, I accept that. I'm Daniel Jose Older, the author of Shadow Shaper, the Bone Street Roomba. The upcoming young adult series just announced is called Outlaw Saints. First book was Ballad and Dagger. And I write a whole bunch of stuff for Star Wars, including the ongoing all ages comic for IDW called Star Wars: The High Republic Adventures, which I'm having so much fun on. And I'm really excited about this book. This book and this team is a dream come true. I'm really happy to be working with y'all. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about it too, because it's just been a really, really great process, and there's so much more ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now we have the amazing Jazmine Joyner, my friend and co-writer and assistant editor. Tell us about yourself, Jazz.
Hello, I'm Jazz Joyner. I am the assistant editor of Megascope and Shirley Imprints at Abrams Comics Arts. And yeah, I just help get these books to their greatest capacity.
Awesome. And last but definitely not least, the other co-author of Death's Day, Baba Malik Duncan. Thank you for joining us, and to tell us about yourself and introduce
Sure. My name is Baba Malik Duncan. You might see me also as Maxwell Duncan. I got many names. I'm a Lukumi priest for 23 years, avid musicologist, big time storyteller. My mentor and friend Daniel Jose Older has turned me into a writer, screaming and kicking. Putting this together has been, I guess, a long time coming, with the thanks and help of John Jennings and all those involved. It's been great.
Well, thank y'all for the quick intro, and it's funny because it's like all of y'all are so amazingly talented, and it's just like, can you truncate your experience into like 3 minutes or like 30 seconds? Right? You know, it's like, it's so hard, right? I mean, so for me, doing something like this is a dream come true. Like, I'm gonna tell you just a little bit of background about Megascope and what we're trying to do. I was very fortunate with my friend Damian Duffy to get the chance to adapt Octavia Butler's Kindred into a graphic novel for Abrams Comic Arts a few years ago. And it was a really wonderful experience. The book did really well. Debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list. Won Eisner, won the Bram Stoker. It still sells pretty well for them, right? Which is great because we see like this kind of upturn in, issues around representation or like things around what we call the black speculative art, or people of color who are working on speculative work, which includes like science fiction, fantasy, horror, magical realism, the like, right? Manifesting itself in like sequential work, right? And so then what happened was I was actually having dinner with Abrams, and I was talking to the publisher Andrew Smith about the success of these these particular types of stories, right? And he was like, well, if there's other work that you want to adapt into comics, let us know. And I was like, well, I was thinking about original art, original comics work, right? And he was like, well, that sounds like a book line. And I was like, oh, yes, it does. So that's kind of like how Megascope was born. I got the title of Megascope from a W.E.B. Du Bois short story called The Princess Steel, which was discovered in 2015, but was just like in his papers. Britt Russert and Adrian Brown, these two professors, found this in his papers. And the fact that we already knew that he wrote speculative fiction, but the fact that he had like a straight up like geeky, like pulp version of like a sci-fi story with this device in it that could see through time and space was just a miracle to me, right? So that was kind of the things that I was really excited about, as far as like starting the line. And so when I first started thinking about, well, who are some of the people I wanted to work with? I mean, one of the first people was Daniel Jose Older was actually in the pitch. You know what I'm saying? There was already like things that I wanted to do with him. There's folks like Chuck Collins that I wanted to work with. I already had a collection of folk that I wanted to work with, and it's been really a wonderful, wonderful ride. So that's kind of like some of the background. Our first book, After the Rain, came out January 5th. Here's the book right here. I adapted a short story by the great Nydia Okorafor into a graphic novel with the wonderful David Brain, with letters by Damian Duffy. And so now we have a wonderful array of books that Jazmine Joyner has helped me pick and put together. Thank you so much, Jazz. I get on her damn nerves every day. I know. She never says it though, but I know I do. So I want to start with just comics in general. So like each of you, like really quickly, because I don't want to burn up too much time, but what made you love comics and what made you get into them? Okay, first of all, like what about comics made you want to do them? You know what I'm saying? Because they're very difficult to make. They're one of the hardest, most unforgiving media ever created. So I'm like, what is wrong with you that you want to make a comic book?
Well, I'll say this: as a kid, it looked like it'd be hard to learn the artwork. You're looking at the stuff, and you're like, oh man, these drawings are so awesome. I'm going to go ahead and learn how to draw. But then when you had no idea what the business was actually going to be like, and then you got into it as an adult, and you were like, why? Why did I do this? This doesn't make any sense. I think for me, when as a kid, I always liked, all the. I was the only kid on my block living in Brooklyn watching Twilight Zone when it came on really late. Like I would stay up and get in trouble just to watch Twilight Zone. And when I started getting into comics, I didn't get into the Marvel stuff right away. I got into like a lot of the horror stuff and a lot of the 2000 AD stuff. It was not too long, like after, I think like when I turned like 12 or 13, I started getting into like most of the, like X-Men was my first big title, and we've always known like the because you saw them on TV all the time, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, all the same stuff. But like, these were the comics that appealed to me, telling me all these kind of stories with, it wasn't just one big cape-toting character to save the cat out of the tree. It was like complex storylines about real things that were going on in what could possibly be the future. I'm like, reading Judge Dredd as a kid, I'm like, oh, is that how cops are going to be in the future? That's messed up. So, but I wanted to be able to tell those kind of stories. So yeah, that's what really got me into it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, comics was my first love artistically, actually. I was a kid who always had a pad and a pen with me everywhere I went, and I would draw everything. I wanted to be a political cartoonist for a long time. I did a graphic novel version of the Iliad, 1 or 2 chapters. When I was like 10, I was just like that. I was that comic nerd, like forever. And then somehow I ended up in prose. And honestly, writing comics, it's really, really hard, and I love it so much, and I'm enjoying it a lot more than writing prose. But I also feel like there's a way in which it almost feels like cheating, because like Bob Malik and I will be like, the dude gets into a fight with the creature, and it takes 5 seconds to write that, and then Chuck has to be like like 16 hours on this like masterpiece, and it doesn't seem fair. So like, it's true, it's hard, but like, in different ways for sure. For us, it's like the hard part is putting that story together and making all the pieces work. And that's what I love about it too, though, is that collaborative piece, and that's how it really reminds me of music, which I did a lot more in my 20s. But it would be like, I would write a song and it would just be a basic song, whatever, it's cool. But then you give it to the band, and Chuck here is the band, and they turn it into this masterpiece, and it's like something else entirely. And I love that. It's like you're constantly in conversation. Malik and I are in conversation with each other, and then we're in conversation with y'all, the editors, and then we're all in conversation with Chuck. And that's such a cool and amazing like way to tell a story as a team.
Yeah, and then you bring in the voices of the editors. So let's see how I segued into jazz. So what started you?
Well, what started me on the journey of editing comics was you, John. But what made me want to make comics or help make comics?
Yeah. What got you into comics, and what made you want to make them? Yeah.
So what got me into comics was my sister. When she went to college, she went to Hampton University, and right off campus was this comic book shop ran by this really weird guy. And I went to visit her, and she took me to the comic shop, and she bought me The Umbrella Academy and the first Sandman book. And Sandman is what got me into comics intensely. Like, I used to read just Marvel comics here and there. If I saw something with Storm on the cover, I would buy it because I love Storm.
Yeah.
But it was Sandman that sucked me in. And then what started this descent into madness that is comics. And then I moved on to manga because I was really into anime, and I learned that those used to be comics before they were TV shows. So then I started reading as much manga as I can get my hands onto. And then I owned a comic book shop in Riverside, California. And you walked in one day, right when I was sending you an email, because I was also interviewing you because I did comics journalism. So I was about to send John this email with the questions in it. And all of a sudden, Tawana, his wife, walked into the store, and I was like, hey, I think that's cool. And so that's when Kindred just came out. And then that night it got on to #1 of the New York Times bestselling list. And so we all went to dinner, and it's kind of like history from there. Like, we just started talking about comic books and how we both love comic books. And after a while, I started reading things you would send to me. And eventually I was like, I can help you with Megascope. I just kept leaving hints. You look like you guys need some help. I can do that. I have time. And then I just got sucked into the void.
The void. Into the gutter.
Into the void, and now here I am.
Right. So Malik, so tell us about how you feel about comics, and how did Daniel trick you into making a comic?
I grew up, comics kept me in school. I had a good friend, James, who was avid comic book collector with his father. And I couldn't stand school, but I would read comics. And that kept me going to school because I would connect with James to get comics because I wasn't going to buy them. And I remember one time going to my brother. I had an older brother who's passed, and I was really into Thor. And I brought him some Thor, and he was just like, yeah. He said, well, you need to be reading Black Panther because he was a Black revolutionary. So that got me into like Black Panther, and then just following comics and following stories, and then really telling stories, because I would just tell stories growing up with my brother and my family.
Mhm.
We a bunch of storytellers. Never thought of putting pictures to them, right? Because we also an avid movie family. So Daniel one day says to me, the story Death's Day basically just had a basis for it. And he said, that would be a good graphic novel. And hadn't ever thought about it. And I was like, oh, all right. And then it turned into, we're going to write this graphic novel. And then it turned into, we got a deal for this graphic novel. That turned into, oh shit, like I got to really now sit down and write this. I got to really start putting stuff together and putting ideas together instead of, just talking. If you just give me some rum and a cigar, I'll tell you a story, So now it turns into this other thing, working with Daniel. And Daniel really is my mentor in writing, who would say to me, Baba, you got to write. Baba, you got to write. Baba, you got to write. So it really forced me to sit down and do that and really, say, all right, let me see how this is going to play out. Let me see how this is going to play out. Let's see what's going to happen.
I love it. I love it. So I want to circle back to Chuck right quick, and because I do want to unpack a little bit more about what Jazmine's doing on a day-to-day basis, and also more about the Death's Day story, the book itself. And you guys can all jump in on this, but I want to start with Chuck because I know I met Chuck because of his work in independent comics. He was in the first Black comics book that we did. I think we started vibing about our love of horror and about other types of like speculative work, and I just really thought that his work was just fantastic, and also I know you've done a lot of stuff around animation directing and stuff like that. What did you think was missing? Okay, so you're making comics. What do you think the things that were missing, from comics that you wanted to put in there as a creator? Like what made you start bouncing things like that?
Oh man. The only reason why I'm gonna say that's a loaded question because there's a lot missing. I mean, there's a whole bunch, but
that's
I think what happened? I didn't hear you.
I said that's why we created Megascope.
Exactly. I think what for me was I just saw an influx of I love horror. I also love anime. I love manga, but I saw this huge influx of independent creators trying to make like the next Static or the next Black Panther, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what you want to do. You want to do the superhero kind of thing. That's cool. But I felt that there were other kind of stories that could be told in the comic book medium that really aren't pushed in our space.
Right.
So the basic like you said, big fan. That's how we vibe. We were all into the horror, especially my favorite being cosmic horror. Supernatural horror and everything else. And I was like, I don't see a lot of these. I mean, there's other mediums doing it, movies and TV, but I don't see it really that much in comics. And I don't see it, or even anything like sci-fi or your basic, which is the reason why I'm such a huge fan of Star Trek Discovery this season is because I'm like, Black love in outer space. I love it. That's you don't really have that as much in our storytelling when it comes down to it. So I really wanted to make books that told stories other than, the basic superhero genre. I wanted something a little bit more different. So
yeah.
I remember, and it's funny because I remember when me and John were talking, and this is like way before I met Daniel. I had picked up the first Shadow Shapers novel, and I read it, and then you and I were talking about it. And then I was like, yo, imagine if Shadow Shapers was a graphic novel, man. I'd draw the hell out of that. And then, like, look, years later, here we go. So, it's right. Definitely something, But yeah, that's basically the thing that I saw in comics that I really wanted to put my own spin on, in that space.
Yeah, to spread it out a little bit more. So anybody else can jump. As far as like what you think, I mean, because Jazmine used to be a retailer, so I was like, I want to hear from, and then circle back around if y'all want to jump in, and then I want to open up to talk about Death's Day. So,
Jazmine, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. What do you, Jazmine, as you or whoever? But I was thinking, I wanted to make sure you got a chance to, Jazmine, talk about what you thought was missing from comics.
So
as a retailer and as a creator. Yeah.
As a retailer and comics journalist, the reason I opened a comic book shop was because I was tired of going to the shops around me that it was like a giant literal gatekeeping. Like you had to answer riddles as a femme person. You walk in and they're like, hey, what's Batman's real name? Like really dumb questions, in my opinion. But you're like, you're not a real comics fan, or the Harley Quinn's in the corner or something weird. So I was like, it makes it very, very uncomfortable. So I opened a comic book space for people who either wanted to get into comics or for women who felt uncomfortable in traditional comic book shops to come and just experience the books without having to prove their fandom. And I feel like those spaces in comics and the gatekeeping were necessary, are necessary at the time. And just there's so much missing from comics. Like Chuck said, just what about a comic about two Black people in love and space? That'd be cool. I'd read the hell out of that. Like there are these stories, and like I feel like Megascope is trying to fill in those spots and show stories that you don't typically see from people of color and Black people. So I think just creating that space and creating telling stories that people don't usually have access to on this level is really dope. And that's why I really love working at Megascope.
Yeah, shout out to both those points. So important. And like, first of all, Chuck, I'm right there with you. Like, you know, superheroes are dope, but that's never been my main like excitement point with comics or with anything. It's a good time, but I love those stories that are like regular people in the city who live regular lives, and then a demon eats one of them and they have to kill it or become it or whatever. You know, like there's so much.
Exactly.
Yeah, like, there's so much to tell there, and yeah, and I'm just excited to be part of that. That's what I've done in my writing career, and it's excited to do that in comics. And to Jazz's point, absolutely. Like I feel like the gatekeeping is just so. It's interesting to me how it shows its head and its weird, ugly face in different worlds, right? Because in the children's book world where I'm coming from, there's still, I would say, almost the same amount, if not more or whatever, about equal amount of gatekeeping, but it's done in that very particular, like pretending to be nice way. That's like the publishing industry, which is like 90% white, and still does the same amount of keeping people out, but with a smile on its face, right? Whereas in like the Star Wars world, and the comics world, you know, like the question I think we really need to ask ourselves, like as people in this industry, is like, how can folks of color and especially non-men feel safe, like women and non-binary folks, and like they are targeted more than anybody else, and exactly that, like it happens on a micro level, happens in the comic book stores, and that really jars me too. Like I think about like Danny Lore. First of all, Danny Lore and Vita Ayala are two such great, important creators out there, like just doing amazing work, and I love this shit. And second of all, Danny used to work at 100 Year Picnic is called? No, 100 Year Picnic is Forbidden Planet in Manhattan, right? Okay. And I would go in there and they would be like, "Oh man, I love your books," right? And I felt so safe and at home because of how they like welcomed me into that store. And that's why like it's extra ironic to me that like the fandom will be so gatekeepy around like exactly that space of like going into the store. Like, what's wrong with y'all? Open the door, you know? And I just think the medium itself gets better the more people we let in and the more stories we get to tell. And that's also why Megascope is so dope. It's so necessary. Like it can't just be like, well, I hope everything's diverse, because that's not how shit works, right? That's how,
it's really not.
That's how shit stays racist. People just sitting around hoping idly for shit. So I'm excited that John came along with a big boot to fuck up that door and, you know, just like let the tide in, and here the fuck we are. Hey.
Malik, you want to chime in, and then I'm gonna ask you to, once you say your piece, I want you to kind of tell us about the origins of Death Day. Okay.
Sure. I mean, it's, for me, it's simple, right? The sister Jazz opens a comic book store. I'm a child of Alegba. You open your own gate, right? You get your own gate. Ask the ones who got their gate. You got a gate, all right, I get a goddamn gate. And this is what's happening over in my gate. And this is what we're gonna do in my gate. And this is who gets to come in and walk in through my gate. Now you're more than welcome to, but if you don't, you know, I grew up in a family where you stay your ass over there. Okay. And that's how I move. And that's how I feel like we need to move. You know, we support each other. We enjoy this genre, this style, the writers. You don't have to enjoy it. You know, you don't want to see Black people out in space that are in love, then don't buy the shit. But we'll buy it, and we'll support it, and we'll support those type of writers and those type of artists and those type of stories. And that's how we do it. For me, that's how I move. That's how I think we should move. You know, folks want to constantly and continually stop this piece, like you're not on the planet. You know, we on the planet. You on the planet, we on the planet. You got stories, we got stories. You know, I mean, like I said, my brother was a Black revolutionary. I could tell you stories about him moving guns in my carriage, in my sister's carriage.
Mm.
You know, so I mean, there's a lot of different types of stories to be told. I could tell you stories about my mother, you know, thinking her son was out of his goddamn mind for doing that. You know, so we got a whole bunch of stories that could tell that run the gamut, from comedy to our own horrors that we know to love and joy. You know, so it's gotta be diverse. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. So I guess that could lead into Death's Day.
Yep.
Death's Day comes out of family trauma of myself. My mother and father it's a family of sickle cell. And my mother basically buried 3 of her children. And my older sister, Ramona, who was like my primary caretaker, when she passed and I came home, my mother was on the couch with family members. And I've never seen, when you hear that word inconsolable, I had to witness that at 9 years old.
Mm.
And me walking with that as I grew, a story just started to form in my head. What if death had a child? Right? Death causes so much grief and so much pain and so much loss. But what if death had death every 1,000 years? 1,000 years to spend, and the day that death comes. So now, right? That's it. and with Daniel, it grew and adding some other dynamics to it. Never really thought of adding faith as a Lukumi priest after dinner. Maybe this can work. Maybe I can pepper it with this and, you know, spice it up with that. So it just started to take form with us working together and putting those different pieces in play and trying to really look at what would happen, quote unquote, to the world if this day didn't happen, if death loses out on this day. You know, what could be the possibilities. So that's what it came out of.
So just kind of following up with that, Daniel, Chuck, can y'all talk about what it's been like to, you know, help build that story, to help, like, you know, think about the characters, think about layouts, think about like pacing, you know, dialogue. How has that been, you know, for you both, or working with this original story that Malik was kind of connected to and pushing and talking about? Like, how's it been translating that story to like a sequential form? Yeah.
So, Chuck, you want to go? Go ahead, man. Jump in.
No. I was gonna say, man, it's been fun. Like, just the overall back and forth that we've been having. Like, I remember doing the initial character designs at first on the character descriptions that you sent me, and you know, we spent all that time like, all right, what if he looked like this, and then he looked like that, and then taking everything that everybody said and then putting it together into this one. It was unlike anything that I've ever done, because usually I step into a project, they have character descriptions, and it's just, here's the base, revision, base. All right, you happy? All right, let me go do this. So, but with this, it was more like along the lines of every step of the way, we were like, all 3 of us just molding these characters together. You know, even down to like some of the fashion. Daniel sent me some stuff like, nah, this jacket works better. And I was like, all right, let's see what's up with that one. So, yeah, and then just the overall layouts and everything is interesting, because Daniel brought this up before. It's like, you know, when you write a thing for which takes you like 5 seconds to write, like, there was a great galactic battle. And then for us, it's like, all right, that's 10 pages worth of like, you know, but the great thing was, it was like both Malik and Daniel, the way that they wrote it was so descriptive that I just didn't have a problem with reading the way that everything worked out. In fact, I did this whole thing when I first started out. Like, I didn't want to read ahead. I just wanted to just draw as I got it, and it was just because it just worked out. There was no like, yeah, there was a couple of like little things here and there to fix as far as like certain views and certain perspectives and everything when it comes to laying out the scenes. But I already knew straight out, like, all right, he's going to step in, do this, that, and third, and so it was definitely something very. The work has been fluid, very, very fluid, and that's very refreshing, especially in this business.
Yeah.
I would agree with all that, and it's also unlike anything I've ever done. I mean, when you hear about Malik talk about just the basic seed of the story, it's like you already know. And now I've said it to so many people in different interviews or meetings or whatever, and just like saying it out loud, like just that one concept is itself really a seed that is it's the root of a tree, and you can feel how big that tree is and just how incredible that story can be. But then it's also like a challenge, right? Because when you have something that cool to start out with, it's like, okay, how do you step up to that coolness and like make a story that is worthy of it? And that was really, I think, the challenge. But that's a great thing. Like, it's like, what's ahead of you. So we got together like a year and a half ago, I think. We Bob Malik came down to New Orleans where I live, and we had basically like a whole weekend of just story breaking where we just went into it and we put all the pieces we had on the table and we threw them around and turned them inside out and just played with it until we just had an entire wall covered of the story. And then we took it apart and put it back together, just went through that whole process of outlining it. And then we kind of split off again and just wrote chunks and passed them back and forth. And it really did feel fluid, even if it was like complex. And it's such a huge story. There are so many moving pieces to it. There's so many realms involved. It's hilarious. It's terrifying. It's sad. It's all the things you would want it to be, in a story about death, whose only child has been kidnapped. And I'm just so excited about it. Like, it's such a cool narrative. And then to see Chuck's art bring it to life it's a whole other level. I was like, this was already a cool story, but now it's something else entirely in the best way.
I have to say that as a developmental editor, it's been really fun to see, because we've been collaborating in WhatsApp. So I've been just kind of like peeking in, conversations and stuff on WhatsApp. It's ongoing. It's called Death's Day Crew, and it's been up in there, and I've just been looking at the process. I will say that the publisher was very excited about the book from get-go. Everything about the book for Abrams just it clicked for them immediately. It was hardly any discussion about it. And speaking of like developmental side of stuff, just for Jazz, as a writer and a consumer of stories, to you, what are some of the things that make you that you respond to in stories like Death's Day or some of the stuff that you've been looking at from Megascope? But like, what are the things like? Because there's certain stories where you're like, we're not gonna do this, because that's actually happened a couple of times when I was like, this stuff is great, and she's like, this story is not. And then, or shoot, or they'll be like, this story is popping. We need to do this like right now. So it's like, what is it about when you get a pitch or a log line or something that touches you as a reader or as a editor?
So for like Death's Day, the world building, it's what brings me in. If it has a great world building and like interesting characters and just cool, if it's just cool, like if I want to know more and I need it and I need to read, and I'm like immediately text you like, who's the artist? I need to imagine what this is going to look like in my head.
Jazz does it all the time. But like, all right, so I've read this pitch. I need to see the art in my head so I can understand like.
Yeah, I need to know. I need to know the style. I need to know what this is going to look like. And if I start doing that, that means yes, we must do this. We must publish this. And the same thing with Death's Day. Like, I read it and I was like, I need to imagine. I was like, who's the artist? Chuck. Okay, this is going to be gorgeous. Let's do it. It's going to be amazing. Let's go. So what draws me in is it has to be like a story with interesting characters and like a great world building and something that sucks you in. And reading pitches, almost immediately, either if the story's right for Megascope or if it's right for right now. Like certain pitches I've read recently, they were too like one of them was about the pandemic, and I'm like, it's too soon because we're still in it, and like I don't want to escape into the pandemic. So let's let's reel that one back and go forward with something else. Or like one of the other pitches that I'm obsessed with that I read, and I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about them at all, but there was one that was just, it was perfection. And I was like, just send it as it is. You don't need to do anything. And it's just the world building and the storytelling is what's important. And if it's the story that we haven't heard before. So like Death's Day, I've never seen anything with this kind of approach. And I think it's so interesting. I feel like people will love it. And just, yes, all of it. Yes.
So when you're in the middle of something like that, I think a good sign is when Jazz like more like, you know, that's a good sign for me. You know, when they're reading something and it's like, all right, you know what, I need to know the intricate notions about this particular thing. Speaking of which, too, as far as like the nuts and bolts of like making something like this, Malik, what's been one of the most challenging aspects of working on, you know, a graphic novel of this magnitude? Because this is a serious undertaking. This book is like what, over 200 some pages, right? And you know, and you're having to like translate the oral to this this really tricky form, because you know, it's a different medium altogether. What's been some of the difficulties of translating what the affect or what you try to get across as a storyteller to the page?
Okay, so when we started, like I said, I'll just tell the story, right? So I'm just flowing. And at one point, Daniel's like, all right, boss, listen, you got to remember, Chuck got to write this. I got to draw it, right? Boss, so you got to draw it. So you can't have, he gets up, he walks over to here, he takes this down. And I was like, all right, damn, I got to slow this up. So getting to that piece where, you know, I have to write this action, and then it leads to this action, then it leads to this action, keeping in mind that I have an artist that's drawing, which is, for me, it got to a point where I had to constantly think about my brother on his piece who's an artist. I have a niece who's an artist. So I started thinking, all right, if I was describing a painting to Kalila or a painting to Akamal or something, and I asked him to draw it, how would they do it? So that became super duper challenging. And then just on my end, who I am, I want to get it out and it be right the first time, right? And that's always been a struggle with me. And Daniel helped me to get to the point where he's like, just right. Like, just get it out. Just get it out, and then we'll go over it. So that was the piece I had to keep working on. Keep your action simple and just get it out. Stop overthinking it. Stop trying to make it perfect, because there's no such thing as perfection. So knock it off. I had to really work on that.
And that's deep, because it was Bob Malik who said to me once, perfection equals death. Avoid it at all costs.
Right.
Yep. That's real. That's real. And like, that's such a hard lesson. Like, and I've taught that to my students. I've literally passed on those words and been like, this dude Bob Malik once told me perfection is death, et cetera, et cetera. And I still struggle with that too. You know, I think we all do. I think particularly in an industry that tells us we are not supposed to be here, we're not good enough, we all want to like nail it the first time. And that's literally not how it works. Like, you can't have the process function correctly if you put it down right. Or if you think you got it right, and then you get edits and you're like, but it's perfect. Why would I change anything? Like, you know, it's like, what's the saying? It's like, better dirt on the body than the body in dirt. And like, you know, that's real. Like, I just want to say I still struggle with that. And like, but we and then each process is learning what that process is. Like, for me, one of my favorite writing advice pieces that I try to remember and constantly forget is caminante no hay camino, se hace camino al andar, which means walker, there is no path, you make the road by walking it, right? Mm-hmm. Machado. And like, that's not just like your whole career, that's literally every project that you work on. And especially when you're collaborating, that changes it entirely. So for this, it was like, you know, with Bob and I, it was like learning what our process is going to be. And fortunately, we found out we worked together really well. We knew that because we go way back. But it was cool to see, like, I would get stuck and I would hit him up and be like, okay, this still happens. I'd be like, Bob, what do you think about this? He'd be like, well, let me just throw some stuff down. He'd throw some stuff down. And immediately, like, I would get unstuck and I would take it and, you know, play with it and mold it, toss it back to him. So we developed a rhythm really quickly. And I think to both of our credit, like, we weren't being perfectionists about process. which is really the most important thing that you can't be a perfectionist about, because you literally have to learn it by doing it. You have to make that road by walking. You have to have a machete every time you walk in the door. And so you can, find what that path is, because you're never actually lost. You're always in the middle of the wilderness. And if you have a machete, you're definitely not lost.
Exactly. I love it. Oh, and your pen is your machete. So really quickly, Professor Stacy Robinson just popped in and said, "Perfection is the enemy of completion."
Check.
Yeah, for real. So that's a really great segue. We have, we're coming down to the end of it. I want to make sure that we get some questions in. I see we got some questions. So craft and process is actually one of the questions. So each of you kind of quickly think about, like, this is from Susu Rock. Can each of you speak on the importance of being strong in your craft, whether it's arts, writing, or business? The importance of craft in your business, basically in every aspect that you're dealing with. And you can pick one, Chuck, you want to jump in about craft, and then you could go Jazz, and then, writing. So.
Well, I think just to piggyback off of what Daniel said, because, he said it like a sage, like a professor. He came in and said, I can't follow up with those kind of analogies, but I will say the one valuable lesson that I've learned is see a project all the way through. If you can't, certain things happen where projects fall apart, but see it all the way through, no matter what. Even if you're stuck in the middle of it, it's not coming out the way you want, it's not, just finish the thing. One of the things that I've always told everybody, and it was an old school artist that told me this. I used to go to cons and show my stuff when I was younger, and a lot was like, why didn't you finish the page? Why didn't you finish the character design? Why didn't you finish this? Why didn't you? And then I was like, well, I didn't like the way it was coming out, but I do like the one part that I did, and that was cool. But I was like, and then they were like, you're not going to be able to actually become better if you don't finish the first thing you're doing. So I make it a point, no matter what I'm working on, even if it's, to me, to other people it may look amazing, but to me it looks hideous. I'll sit there, like, I'm just gonna finish this until it's done. And even if I do decide to take the piece and do it all over again, I have now learned and saw what I did that was wrong. And the second time around with the second pass, I'll be able to do better. And I actually carry that mentality with everything that I do. Is like, look, we started it, let's finish it. If it didn't come out the way but the next time around, we do it better. That's just what it is. You got to take all those mistakes. Now, if you do it the next time around, you did it the same way you did it the first time, then you're asking for trouble. But at the same time, you got to take those mistakes, and then you have to apply them. It's like learning the mistake is one thing, but then you have to apply it. So that's why, to me, finishing something all the way through is always the best solution.
Anybody else on craft? As we're, we get more questions now. Dang it, y'all! This is a good question. All right, any more issues about craft? Jazz, you want to try to chime in for something?
What I always go through, whether I'm writing or editing or anything, is I think of Octavia Butler said the most important thing with her writing, her craft, or anything is just persistence. So just be persistent and continuously just, even if you don't want to, like Chuck said, and you think whatever you're doing is garbage, just finish it. Just keep going. Just get it done. And then, you'll have that accomplishment, and you can learn, like, okay, this is something that I need to work on. You just need to be persistent in your work and your craft. And I think that's really all I focus on when I do anything, persistence.
Daniel?
Yeah. It's definitely all of that. I think something for me, it's interesting because something I've always said everywhere I go, when I teach, when I do workshops, whatever, is that writing isn't rooted in Microsoft Word, it's rooted in the spoken word. And that's a truth that I try to carry in all the work I do and how I live my life. Because I think writing, especially with such a white publishing industry, is really intent on trying to pretend that it's just this thing that we do that's just us and our computer, and we have that old image of like the solitary drunk white dude in a cabin having a bad divorce, you know, like it's not healthy, even if that is who you are. It's just not healthy to like look up to that, right? The truth is, like, writing is a community event, because storytelling is a community event, and that's what we're doing at the end of the day. We're telling stories, and that's what it's rooted in. And like, as much as I learned from the books that I read, and I am a true book nerd and a comic book nerd, I learned just as much from, you know, bodegas and like working on an ambulance and the stories that we were told, and Bob Malik. So like, he calls me his mentor, but I learned how to write from him too, you know, and like, because he's a storyteller. And that's why like this project works, is because he's a great storyteller, and we're putting our minds together as two storytellers, right? Bringing different parts to the equation, but that's what it is. Like, writing goes back to the stories that we tell each other. And like, being rooted in that, I think, has gotten me through so many really dangerous times for my soul and my psyche in publishing, because publishing can be so toxic and fucked up on so many levels. And because they will try to rip your voice out at its root and make it sound more like what they think it's supposed to sound like or whatever. But remember that the real people that we're looking up to are the folks that we're actually writing for, that we've learned for, that we heard stories from first. It's a lot easier to ground yourself. And as Walter Mosley once reminded me in a group chat, he wasn't just speaking to me personally, but he was like, the founder of what we call Western literature was illiterate and blind. And people are still trying to make graphic novels out of the Iliad at age 11. And here we are, to bring it full circle.
That's pretty wild. Malik, any thoughts on craft? Not only just storytelling, but just, you know, living life, or things that we, you know, just about how you're.
Yeah. I mean, for me, craft is everything. It's how you walk, how you talk, who you interact with, right? What you pull from that. Like, I run a lot of my stories by my older sister, and if Zahara gives me the yo, that's hot, that gives me, all right, now I'm gonna go with this. All right. I run stories by my nieces, to, you know, and it's just talking. Sometimes I'm just talking and they're like, oh, uncle, what you talking about? And I'll have a piece of something and run about them, and they're like, oh, that sounds good. And then it gets me to, you know, jotting something down. Craft for me was like, back in the day, you know, I wanted to be an MC. So I used to MC, but I was always in crews because I grew up on crews. And part of that piece, though, was what's happening now. It's collaborative. I have to collaborate. I have to bounce something off of somebody. Right. I used to tell my sister, I can't be a solo MC. I don't have that much ego. All right. I can't do it. But in a crew, me and 4 of my boys, 5 of my boys, that was easy. I'd rhyme, they rhyme. They pass the rhyme back, I pass the rhyme back to them. You know, we could bounce those ideas off of each other. And that really helped. It helps me in craft. It helps me understand what I'm doing. It helps me understand that I'm telling a story to people to spark their interest. You know, what's going to be interesting to them, what's going to pull them in. Like Jazz said, I'm trying to pull you into a world. So that means I got to build a world. How do I do that? And what do I find? What's the line? What's the thing that I find that pulls you in, that makes you interested to go, oh, I want to hear the rest of this. I want to read the rest of this. I want to see the rest of this. And for me, that only works when you're sharing that with people. I can't write solitary. I got to talk to somebody. You know, I got to hear, somebody has to say something to me. Even if it is not, you know, even if they say, no, I don't think that's going to work, you know, but I got to hear something that gives me the idea to keep it moving. You know, that helps me for my craft.
I'm thinking, for me as an editor, you know, I'm thinking, what are the things that's not being said? You know, are the things that are being shown that are too much? You know, a lot of times, you know, you can, it's almost like, you know, the idea of like sculpting is like the sculpture's already there, but you have to like cut away what's unnecessary, you know. And in comics, you show, you don't tell, right, a lot of times. So it's a very particular medium, a balance between the two. Really quickly too, because I don't want to run out of time. I want to get to some of the other questions. One of the questions was, what's the biggest struggle in curating stories for Megascope besides the pandemic or other events that are too soon? For me, honestly, and Jazz can speak to this too, there is only a certain amount of books that we can put out per year. As soon as we announced my Megascope, I had like 60 proposals in my inbox on Facebook. It was crazy. There's so many stories that are out there that are worthy to be told, but the process is actually very arduous and slow. You know, I mean, you know, Abrams is a great company, but it's a corporation. It's a multinational company. It has a lot of moving parts to it. There's a lot of people that have say about things. And at the end of the day, you actually have to make decisions about like, okay, what books do I think that I love that I can get through? It's about spinning it. So every book that comes in, I have to actually take to the editorial board. I got to take to the publication board, and everybody weighs in. Sales, marketing, design. The CEO. All these different things. There's so many voices in the room, but I'm in the room, and that's something that's very different. That's one of the things that makes us very different is that very seldom do people like us have a seat at that table to talk about those issues. Because at the end of the day, they have to put out books, and they want to make sure that these books are good and they're getting to the right folk. But it's a very arduous process, and that's the thing. So, yeah, so that's my answer for that. Did you have any things about that, Jazz?
For me, the hardest part is just wanting to publish all of them.
Yes, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's so many good stories, and like the fact that there's only so many slots we can put books in. It's like trying to narrow down, okay, which stories match what Megascope is trying to do, and what sticks out, what's a different story that can possibly make way so we can maybe get more books published, like something that brings in more attention, so then maybe they'll be like, hey, you can add another book to this list. Like trying to narrow it down is like the hardest thing.
It's one of the difficult things. I think because we're a new space too, that we don't because we're hey because we're a new space as well. Hey, so oh my God, I can see your nose hair. Nice. Okay.
Tiny.
All right. Yeah, because we're a new space, we're still improving. I think it looks like the first book is doing well. It's definitely been like, critically acclaimed. And, the next books are coming out in the spring. So we'll see how those run. But we'll have to build something. It takes a while to build an audience. It takes a while to build, force behind things. But we're in a very interesting space right now because there's been a definite shift in various markets around representation. And now that we know that there's an audience, there are people out here who will read these books, and that's basically what they're waiting for. Let's see a couple of things, and because we're super close, where do you see the speculative graphic novel industry moving as a cultural and economic power? That's an interesting question.
That's all you, John.
Oh, that's on me? No.
Who else gonna answer that, John? That's you. That's literally your job.
I'm like, okay, wait. I'm like, yeah, I'm waiting to hear. Anyway, I'm like, oh, okay. Well, here's the thing. I mean, I think that personally, looking at, again, the sea change that I've been seeing happen for different reasons, I hate that it took a global pandemic and the murder of not only George Floyd, but, a plethora, Breonna Taylor, the list goes on and on, for people to see like, oh, wait a minute, these stories are relevant, and there's a disparity that's happening, right? So that's a shame, but better late than never in some ways. The people on this panel that I'm with have always been dope. Always been dope. You know what I'm saying? Always been here. I was just talking to Kari Randolph about that. He's like, yo, I'm 42 years old. I've been doing this forever. I've been doing this, it's just that you just assume things. So I think what's happened is there's been a shift in the people who are like the gatekeepers looking at these things, not only like in comics, but in like other media forms too. I mean, Orion Pictures is being run by a Black queer woman now. And they're looking for stories to tell that are not just the mainstream white gaze. So that's a big thing. So I think I'm hoping that this isn't like a trend, that it actually just becomes another way that we tell stories. It just becomes another category. It kind of what happened with hip hop. It's not a flash in the pan. It's just become the way that we get down. That's what I'm hoping. Shoot. Let's see.
Wait, can I ask something real quick? Because Jazz, you worked at a store and then you were editing. I was just wondering from that question.
You own the store.
You own the store. Oh, you own it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So like but did you see a change over the past couple of years? Like who comes in and how comfortable they feel, and then being an editorial, does it look different?
Well, from my store, I tried to carry more indie books and more books by people of color and queer people. So at first, of course, I get the people who want the big two, the Marvel and DC comics. But after a while, once they found out that there were other books and people would come, and I also had a program where if you brought in a graphic novel, we could trade, because some people couldn't afford books, but they could bring in one that they had, and then we could just trade books, and they just kind of got books that way. And so I started to see people coming in, and people who usually were like, oh, I didn't really get into comics, but I would recommend them, like, oh, what TV shows do you watch? Whatever you watch, or like, oh, this book has this about it. So I like that comics, people are learning that there's more to comics than just superheroes and Marvel and DC. And over time, you're noticing like books that aren't just about Batman or whatever are becoming more popular. More people are going to the store for like Kindred and like to read more, like learning more about Octavia Butler through the Parable books and all of that stuff. Like it feels like that it is changing and morphing, and that more people are interested in more diverse and interesting stories, which makes me happy because there's so many more interesting stories than Batman and the Joker. If I get one more Joker Batman movie, I might just scream.
But I did just got this really dope Batman Joker book, though. I got to show you. Anyway, I want to, because we started late, so I'm gonna be like, all right, maybe take a little. They could cut us off, but there's this question that keeps popping up. Do you find that there's a dissonance between what you feel led to create and what you feel you're supposed to be creating? Malik, you want to jump on that one? Do you feel that there's a dissonance between what you feel led to create, or what you think is that you're supposed to be creating? So I guess it's a question about like the authenticity of the story as opposed to what the market might want it to be. And Daniel kind of touched on that a little bit, in his comments. But how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the market, right? Everybody, because you want to make money. You want to make money at what you're doing, right?
Right.
Okay, Daniel can relate to this. When you're in the tradition we talk about is spirit. The worst thing to do is have spirit ride you. Okay, it's the worst. Do what I'm telling you to do, right? So this story started, and I couldn't, market it to the market, because that's not what spirit was telling me. It was like, no, this is the story. This is what you're going to tell. This is what's going to happen. No, don't make it cute. You don't need a cute little this, or you don't need something of that. This is what's going to, yes, the child's going to get kidnapped. You know what I mean? It's like, this is what's happening. And every time I would feel like, oh, I need to shift this, or maybe and this is why it took so damn long, because I'm doing my thing, right? Arguing with myself instead of just listening to spirit, listening to what it's telling me. The story is telling me. I don't know if I said this to Daniel, but I say to my sister constantly, sometimes I would just like to sit down and watch a show, right? And not automatically the voices start, and now I'm starting a new story in my head and blah, blah, blah. And because now, it's inspired something. So I really roll with that inspiration, which for me is the spirit. I'm not going to tailor it. I'm not going to, I remember when I started the story, my godmother said, oh, Malik, they might want to change the child and make her white. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. Right? That's not what's happening. And if that's the case, then you're not the person I need to sell the story to. You know what I'm saying? This is the story. Part of the story comes from my life. Part of it comes from seeing my sister on the floor dead. So no, you can't change that. That's spirit, right? So I really try to stay in that mode and work it at that angle. I hope that answers it.
Yeah. But Kwanzaa just popped up in here, so I guess we need to stop.
Yeah.
Kwanzaa.
He's like, yo, y'all
pop in and then everybody leave. What's that? What's that?
I guess we could.
Quite the opposite, my brother. No, we love you. No. I guess we